Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CSIS. My name is Jennifer Cooke. I'm director of the Africa program here at CSIS. I want to first off say a particular thanks to Stephen Hayes, who's president and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, and Ephraim Fisher of CCA, and to our own Africa program staff, Sophie Bohm, Sarah Graveline, and Casey Barton for helping pull this together. So thank you, Steve, and the Corporate Council. Of course, also a special welcome to our very distinguished visitors. Stephen Hayes is going to introduce them in a moment. But as you'll hear, they're very senior leaders representing a range of perspectives, business, academic, and national institutions, each involved in different ways in Chinese-African engagement. There's been a lot of discussion here in Washington over the recent years, about China's role in Africa. What does it mean? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a strategic competitor? Is there room for cooperation? But in fact, it's not so often that we have the opportunity to engage directly in forums like this with an array of Chinese perspectives at the table. So welcome to our delegation. We're delighted to host you. And I think, as I think of the broad debates that happen here in Washington around China's role in Africa, they are evolving, but there have been a couple of tacit assumptions, I think, that seem to recur over time. First, that Chinese engagement and interests in Africa are monolithic, that while there are various strands of engagement, they all lead to one greater goal. They all complement one another, as though there's some invisible strategic hand that coordinates and guides overall engagement. But with the expanding number and diversity of Chinese actors in Africa, diplomatic, state-owned businesses, private companies and entrepreneurs, developmental specialists, and so forth, I wonder whether there is not a growing diversity of interests and strategies that may actually occasionally compete with one another. For example, and we were talking about this just prior to the session, does the oft-stated policy of political non-interference sometimes impede investors who may be looking for greater security and conflict mitigation, better working relations with local communities and civil society actors, more reliable and transparent regulatory regimes, etc.? A second assumption, I think, is that Chinese engagement is static, and that the approaches that were prevalent when China's dramatic expansion of engagement began in the 1990s, which was largely government to government, has remained true. It'll be interesting to hear from our panelists how they see the strategies of various Chinese actors evolving in Africa. Related to this, the African context is not uniform either. And while in some countries governments are fairly impervious to public opinion, in others powerful non-governmental groups, labor unions, civil society, media, environmental and political activists, opposition parties in fact, play an important role that external partners need to take into account. So China's engagement is often praised as win-win, but in individual African countries, there's likely to be considerable diversity of opinion about the benefits and growing questions around who exactly is winning. Is it the political elite or the broader citizenry? Finally, has been the assumption that U.S. and Chinese economic engagement is zero-sum, with the focus on the idea of strategic competition for influence, for markets, for resources, and much less on the areas of potential mutual interests. There is obviously a level of competition that's healthy for Africa. I think China's expansion into Africa has piqued the interests of a number of U.S. investors who have been traditionally risk-averse and have kind of painted Africa with a broad brush and stayed away, but are now beginning to engage. And in that, I think, and this will be the topic for our discussion today, there are areas of mutual interests and potential for cooperation. In terms of an investor-friendly environment, and this includes the infrastructure, it includes technological and labor capacities, it includes regulatory regimes that are reliable and transparent, and peace and security, community engagement, and so forth. So I'm going to turn over to Stephen Hayes to introduce the panel. We're going to hear briefly from our speakers, but then open up for what we hope will be a lively and interactive session. So thanks very much, Steve.
All right. I would like, as head of the Corporate Council on Africa, explain why CCA is bringing this delegation over. And we're, first of all, very grateful to CSIS and Jennifer particularly, who's been a friend and supporter for a very long time, to take this on today. Obviously, the Corporate Council on Africa represents about 180 companies. They collectively represent about 85% of all U.S. private sector investment in Africa. That's very easy to document and verify, in large part because most of the investment, U.S. investment in Africa, is energy related. So with most of those companies as part of CCA, then it's very easy to factor out and get and document. However, out of those 180 companies, there are the energy sector represents only 6%. So we have 19 different sectors. They all are, what they have in common is that they are already engaged in Africa in one way or another. Our challenge is trying to get a far greater U.S. investment in Africa and far greater trade. And also, I should say, far broader. If you take 7 countries in Africa out of the equation, there's almost no U.S. investment in Africa. So that is not in our economic interest. I don't think it's in the interest of Africa. And so our challenge is, how do we increase that trade? We, of course, because our businesses are there, they are in many ways and many times ahead of the curve in what's going on in Africa. And certainly China, the growing China presence, and I think if not in 2009, certainly in 2010, when the final figures will go out, it will show that China is now a larger investor in Africa than is the United States. So that does say that there is competition. And a lot of our businesses get concerned on competition, but it's a fact of life. It's something that we have to deal with. We also think that the needs are so great in Africa that, in fact, it is not the purview of any one country. Certainly, the U.S. has stated that over and over officially, and that, in fact, we've got to find ways to cooperate. The China needs are valid. The reasons to be in Africa are valid, equally valid to the U.S. or any other country. And again, though, there is competition, but also is there opportunities for cooperation. The aspect of cooperation between the U.S. and China in Africa has really not emerged. It's what we're examining, and why we invited the delegation over, is to begin to explore. And this is I want to emphasize, this is a non-governmental delegation. There are those, perhaps even in this room, that believe everything's a monolith, that we've already encountered some of that in U.S. government, that there's no real private sector. The truth is that there's probably more entrepreneurs in China than there are in the United States, just by the sheer number of population. That would come as a shock, and evidently does come as a shock to many still. So there is a very different China. There is an America that needs to catch up, both to China and also to, if you're on a cell phone back there, I guess, but don't want to interfere with the call. But in any case, so we are looking at ways that we can cooperate. Is it possible? Now, this delegation goes back to the importance of building relationships. It comes from a professional relationship and friendship that was started in 1987 when I first began going to China under the auspices of another organization and building leadership exchanges, emerging leadership exchanges between China and the United States. The fact is now that that leadership has emerged. And so we felt that we've always kept in communication, and we felt that given where some of our contacts were and our friendships were both going through Africa, it was time that we used what we're doing now to try to build that bridge as well. So this is an exploratory trip. It is a delegation chosen by the Chinese Economic and Social Council, of which I think your former requirement, I don't know if it's still a requirement, but 10 years ago the requirement was that at least 60% of the membership had to be non-party members. It is where a lot of the intellectual progressive thought emerges out of. It's part of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which is one of the 4 pillars of the Chinese Constitution. It is an important, very important organization, just as CPPCC is. The chairman of this delegation is Annie Wu. Annie is from Hong Kong, was in Hong Kong when Hong Kong went back to China, and is chairman of the World Trade Center in Hong Kong, which, as all of you know, or just by inference, would be one of the most important trade centers in the world. She is also a member of the Standing Committee on the Chinese Economic Social Council, and far more importantly, she's also a very high-ranking member in the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, to which I will now refer to as CPPCC in the future. And I think in terms of business, what's really, I think, very notable is that the company that she helped start, it was the first company in China to do joint venture. So it's the Beijing Catering Company. So again, Annie Wu is a person of many, many talents. She's one of the most respected women in China, one of the most well-known women in China, and it is a great honor that she was selected to lead this delegation, so we're honored that she is with us. I am not going to introduce the entire delegation, not because of fear of tripping over names, which I may do, but I think Annie would be better to name the panelists and give the background a little bit, and then we could have the delegation stand. So Annie will, the procedure, as I believe, Jennifer, is that Annie will say a few words, and then we will open it up to question and answer. Is that?
You may want a little addition from
Yeah.
our fellow panelists.
Right, sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sheng. Is come from Sinohydro Corporation Limited. Sinohydro Corporation is the biggest one construction company in China. The main business is for dams and hydropower. Now Sinohydro is an international company, so works in 60 countries in the world. So our main business is in Africa. So now we come here to try to think opportunities with American company to enter into African market. So thank you.
I'm just checking my watch to say good morning or good afternoon. We lost the sense of the calendar because we have been traveling all the way from the Chicago and then St. Louis and now DC. So my name is Wenping. I'm the director and the professor of the African research sector in the Institute of Western Asian and African Studies, affiliated with Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. So if you don't know this academy, maybe just a few words. I introduced this national think tank and under the direct leadership of State Council. It has 36 institutions and covering all the humanity research. In terms of area studies, we have 8 institutions. So my institution is focused on 2 areas. One is Middle East, another is Africa. So that's why I'm so glad to have a chance to join this delegation, to have a chance to share and discuss the both concerned issues here. Thanks.
Would you like to stand?
Do you want me to introduce the other people?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, all right. I think I just want to, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have other members of the delegation who are on the first row, and I just want to briefly mention their name. We have Madam Xia Jihui, she's the Secretary General of CESC, and then we also have Madame Liu Huanling, she's the Secretary General of the China-Africa Economic and Technological Cooperation Committee and of the CSC. And also we have Mr. Zheng Wen, he's the Senior Program Officer for International Department of CSC, and also my colleague Lina Xu, also with the delegation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, and I'd like to say thank you to Jennifer and also to our most famous gentleman in China, Mr. Steve Hayes, for giving us the chance to come over here. I'm Annie. I was born and brought up in Hong Kong, educated in Roman Catholic High School run by the Italian nuns from Canossa in Verona, where you have the Romeo and Juliet famous play written by William Shakespeare. So my first language in school is English, not Chinese, and I told me speak Cantonese dialect. There are 3 books that I read in primary school and high school that really that's why I was very fascinated to go to Africa. The first book was King Solomon's Mine, and I thought, well, someday I should go to see the Mount Kilimanjaro and look at all the warriors in Africa. The next book was I read about wrestlers. A prince from, in the old days, called Abyssinia. Nowadays, it's called Ethiopia. He was looking for happiness and fulfillment in lifetime. And then the last book before I graduated from high school in Hong Kong is the book written by the famous gentleman from South Africa, Alan Paton, Cry My Beloved Country. So all in all, in my high school, I thought someday I should like to do something in Africa. Someday I'd like to see this vast but very magnificent continent. So after I came back from university, I went to school in UK, went to university for 2.5 years in Berkeley, and then I started my first job in Osaka Expo, 1970. In 1972, I was promoting Hong Kong with the Tourist Association. So we have a chance to go to South Africa to promote tourists from South Africa to Hong Kong. That was before Hong Kong was returned to the motherland. And at that time in South Africa, in Johannesburg, was still under apartheid system. And I thought maybe someday this country has to be, has to change, has to become independent, has to let the South Africans run its own country. So after 1994, I thought what Nelson Mandela has done for South Africa is not only for South Africa, it's for everyone. They should have their own way to manage their own government, to run their own country. Because we in Hong Kong and even in China, we believe in every country has its own way to manage its own country and manage its own government affairs. And this is the most important of what we call sovereignty and your own sovereign rights. After I've been working in Hong Kong for a few years, we have the opportunity to do business in China. It was because of the idea of Mr. Deng Xiaoping and his team. And I think anyone in China would say thank you to Mr. Deng for opening up the country, for giving a chance to do the first joint venture. Just now, as Steve mentioned, the first joint venture is not easy to do because just like for someone going to South Africa today or to any African countries, we have to introduce the company laws from Hong Kong, change it from English to Chinese. We have to introduce all the articles of incorporation from Hong Kong. We have to introduce double entry bookkeeping in Beijing. And we have to introduce auditor system. Everything is from scratch. But for me from Hong Kong, I thought since we are trying to do something from scratch, it's the best time to build something on an international standard. So when we did the Beijing Air Catering, I have to import not only capital, not only equipment, but the know-how, the technology, the market sense, and also the way of the administration. And I think what I have done in Beijing back in those days is also an application to see how we can do something in Africa, in certain new industries, a new business in this present day. I started going back to South Africa and other African countries about 6 years ago because I volunteered myself to join the China African Business Council, which is an NGO formed by the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, in conjunction with the Guangchai program. The Guangchai name is translation of Chinese. That means the entrepreneurs like us, we put in a sum of money, we form a foundation, and then we use the money to help alleviate poverty. So what we have done for all these entrepreneurs, we try to participate in the UN program to form the China African Business Council. So all of us are not government people and we are not civil servants, but we entrepreneurs try to look overseas to do business in other countries to be useful to the economic empowerment of those areas. And then back in about 6 years ago, I started to travel with the group to Kenya. I've been 3 times in Tanzania, attended the meetings held by the UNDP, held by UNCTAD, and then also held by the association from UK. I've also been to Cameroon, to Yaoundé, been to 6 times to South Africa, to Joburg, to Cape Town. Also been to Ghana. We helped to form a World Trade Center in Accra, in Ghana. And I'm actually looking forward to see more areas that we can do our services in Africa. I'm not carrying a business in Africa, but the way what we have been doing in China, we thought if we can use what we have accumulated our experience in doing our business in China, maybe we can also be useful to the young people in Africa, help them to have their own economic independence, create opportunities for them in their own country. And it may be some time that we can do a win-win partnership in international business. What we have seen in China nowadays, I think we have at least over about 100,000 African students who graduated from China, from Beijing, Shanghai. They are now all staying around the Pearl River Delta. And I spoke to a few of them, and they said they would like to go back to work in their home area. But right now, they don't see there's an opportunity or a chance for them to utilize their skill and know-how, or maybe work with MNC back in their hometown. So what they have been doing now is really staying in Guangzhou or Shenzhen, doing the trading, buying a lot of goods from China, and then take the China Southern Airways and go back to their own countries to become a trader. So if we can help them to establish more business in the home area, then maybe in a way we can help them to be the next tier of entrepreneurs in their own country. And I think this is a partnership I can see that between USA and China, we can help these people to be more service-oriented to their own place, and then they don't need to live in another country. Also, what they have learned from overseas will be very helpful. What USA can offer to is your know-how and the technology, and also your R&D, and also your services on capital structure and formation. What China can offer is the opportunity to provide a big market for the products made from Africa. Also the know-how to help them to do a lot of what we call basic infrastructure, and also a lot of other forthcoming activities in the new markets. So I think I will leave the question and answer time to answer your questions. And I let our experts, especially Madam Ho, who has always lived in different countries in Africa, to do the following address to you. But all in all, I think the world is getting very small. We are all living in the same planet, and we have a few issues that we are very concerned. One is we are lack of food, because food scarcity and food hygiene and food security is the main topic, not only for USA or for China, but also for Africa. Next thing, I think we are having a problem with climate change for the shortage of water, scarcity in water supply. And the third thing is, if we don't take care of the health of the young children, whenever we have a problem like the SARS problem, or nowadays we have the E. coli in Germany, there's no national boundary on sickness. And I think maybe we should work together to have a better health care for everyone and for our future and for our young people. Thank you very much.
All right. Knowing many of you in the audience, I'm sure there are plenty of questions, but again, this is a non-governmental delegation. It's not going to be able to address questions of China military policy or so forth. What we really want to focus on is if possible, economic policy, trade issues, competition, and so forth. So with that, could I take a question? Straight back. Sorry. Jennifer, sorry, was I? Did you also want? No, that's, no, would you like to go ahead and say something? Well, then go right ahead. This is proof that this is impromptu.
Yes, yes, cooperation.
Yes, it's on the spot, so. Go ahead.
So finish 3 and then.
No, you go ahead.
Yes. Okay. I also follow suit to go to this very important place. Pretended to be important. Okay, first of all, I would like to add my thanks to Dr. Hayes, Dr. Jennifer, for your kind hospitality, and also thank all audience here, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for your coming. I know the weather outside of the room is extremely hot, so it's not easy for coming by. I think from the introduction given by Dr. Hayes, I even want to start with a survey right now. I know the condition maybe is not perfect for doing so. The survey is what? Because the Hayes introduction has mentioned 2 important words. One is the cooperation. Another C is the competition. So I don't know. If anybody want to raise your hand for cooperation, please raise your hand. And for competition, please raise your hand. And then I can continue my speech. So for the competition, please raise your hand. Wow, so very few. So for the cooperation, so you can see. So this is very good atmosphere for our dialogue, at least. So I think because the given time for my very short speech is only less than 10 minutes, right? I'm the person often overuse the time, so please remind me. So I would like to address 3 points for this issue we are going to discuss. This is the trilateral cooperation. So I just thought about this title I'm going to address is how could we make this trilateral cooperation happen? So first point is what we need. I think first of all, we need is the willingness. So does this willingness exist? From the room here, I figured out it exists here. But I'm not so sure whether it exists in Africa or in the corporations in China or American corporation. Not only exists in White House or Zhonglanhai in China. So I think I searched for those official documents in China. There are 2 official documents that are very relevant for our discussion today. One is the China's Africa policy published January 2006. So when it refers to multilateral cooperation, it reads like that, quote, China will step up cooperation with other countries and international organizations to support the development of Africa and help realize the Millennium Development Goals in Africa, MDGs, so end quote. And then another very important white paper that was issued just recently, April 2011, is called China's Foreign Aid White Paper. So when it mentioned the multilateral cooperation, it reads like that, so quote, under the framework of South-South cooperation, China will work with all parties concerned to conduct complementary and fruitful trilateral and regional cooperation on the basis of respecting the needs of recipient countries and jointly promote the process of global poverty alleviation, end quote. So it has been written very clearly, which means Chinese government's attitude is quite open. So the willingness is there. And then I'm trying to find also the relevant white paper issued by United States governments, but I couldn't find. So I think, but I can find some relevant speeches given by either very high-level officials or from some strategic think tank, for example, from CSIS. So actually, the meaning are the same. Also, there are willingness in White House, right here in DC, also from those think tanks. But now I will later address lower level are there willingness from the lower level? Because I spent my times like in Rwanda to do these trilateral cooperation projects. So I asked around, like DFID, like USAID, so those officials, they are doing this kind of work on the ground. So unfortunately, I think the opinion coming from the, the grassroots officials, if I use these grassroots officials, not only grassroots people, so it's not so positive. It's not so strong as those opinions I heard constantly from those high political circles. So that's another issue. So back to this willingness, another third party that is very important, that is Africa. Because we are not talking about things between China and the United States. We are talking about this kind of cooperation in another third party, the host continent, that is Africa. Unfortunately, the opinion coming from the Africa is not so positive at all. So generally speaking, they are so worried about this cooperation that will less constrain their alternative choice. Because for them, they feel very relaxed and flexibility when they deal with those powers separately. And recently, I joined the conference in Hong Kong University. And African scholar, now he's teaching in Hong Kong University, he offered a paper in this seminar, and the title of this paper shows everything. He said, in my father's house are many rooms. Towards an African-driven win-for-all investment policy in Africa. He doubts it is a fallacy of this so-called www. It's not www.com company. It's called win-win-win. So because this is hypothesis, saying if you're doing this, and then you will win for your guys and for China and for United States and also for Africa. But African people, they are doubt about this W. So they are saying they don't like to host this, to embrace this. So this is the willingness seems lacking in the continent. So this is the second point I address. And secondly, I think what kind of environment we need to have if we want to push forward this trilateral cooperation. So between China and the United States, now we just put aside the opinion coming from African continent. I don't see, there are some African friends right here. So we are going to listen their opinion later on. So now just talk about China, United States. So we also have some troubles between China and the United States. What kind of trouble? I think first the trouble is, it seems the atmosphere, the friendly and the equally atmosphere seems doesn't exist so far. Sometimes it exists, we see it in a very positive way, and then suddenly it disappeared. So I think the mutual trust and mutual respect is a very important thing. For example, I can give a very recent example. When your highest diplomat, okay, Mrs. Hillary Clinton, maybe I can name her name, doesn't matter. I think she's very tough. She can handle all those criticism I gave to her. And she made this criticism to China, saying the new colonialism, right? I think this is not so constructive comments towards building a trilateral cooperation in Africa. So this is just a recent story we can hear quite a lot, on and off, on and off. So whenever the atmosphere has been building towards a positive way, and then suddenly some not so constructive voice coming out. So I think we badly need a very good environment to push forward this mutual understanding and the good willing to push trilateral cooperation. And thirdly, I think that is how to make things in a very practical way. So when you are always talking, personally, I have been enjoying. I cannot count how many times of this trilateral dialogue meeting. Sometimes in Europe, also now the Europeans also trying to push China to have this trilateral cooperation. And I also have done this with others, American stakeholders based here. So I think if you spend a lot of time on talking, it's still in the talking club. So now we need to move these things from talking club to the field, to the continent in the field. So in order to transform this from talking to the things in the talking to the field, so first of all, we need to find sectors. And then secondly, we need to find also the project. And thirdly, we need to find a country in African continent. So those are three very fundamental elements. So sector, what kind of sector is easier for move on? I don't think energy issue, I don't think a governance issue or security issue now is the suitable topic to mention with, because it's so sensibility. We have some different understanding about governance. Yeah, this is open knowledge to everybody. And so we should start from those less sensitive fields, such as all the way we have been to like Chicago, St. Louis. We have visited a number of United States high-tech agricultural companies like Novus. Yeah, now they are doing a lot of good things in Africa, providing those animal health, nutrition, those kind of things in Africa. So, and I think agriculture now is very good, both interesting area, sector. And then the second is how to find the project itself. So once again, back to the Novus, because those number of American companies I have been visited is very, very limited. So you have to forgive me. I often choose the Novus as an example. So because I'm sure there are many of this kind of United States companies. So, but I do find, because I visited some Chinese agricultural companies doing business in Uganda. Last August, I spent half month to do this field work about Chinese business in Uganda. And I found they have done also quite good network for selling their Chinese agricultural equipment. So they have their own network and distributors all over the country. And also the Novus, they're also building their network. So if those things come combining, not only for selling those good animal nutritions for cows, and then also those farmers that need equipment. So I think that's some area. Oh, Jennifer, you're going to show me the reminding. All right, I'm going to conclude. Yeah, and then the country, because three sectors I mentioned. So the country, because nowadays in the 53, now it's 54. South Sudan now is independent. So 54 countries. I don't think all those 54 countries, they share both good feeling to China and the United States. So we need to find the suitable country that have both good feeling to both China and Africa. Otherwise, things are getting even worse. Not good for good, it's for bad for those African countries. So so a lot of investigation and research has to be undertaken in advance. Maybe I can name one candidate. That is the newly independent South Sudan. We just discussed about that because huge potentials. So thank you for your attention.
Mr. Sheng, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, first I'd like to say thanks too much to Mr. Harris and Ms. Jeff, and thanks to everybody here. Africa is no doubt increasing hot in terms of care and attention from the rest of the globe, evidenced by everyday coming reports on Africa issues, by various summits or forums involving Africa as the counterpart, by frequent high-level visits from the world, highly influencing countries, among which are China and the United States. The hate, however, is also surrounding an agreement about the economic engagement of both China and America in Africa, with respect to alleged competition as a result of conflicts of interest. And this agreement is also about the space and the change and the solutions to cooperation between the two countries in the African market. The rest of my speech presents from the perspective of Sinohydro cooperation, the space and the prospects of cooperation between China and America in Africa. I can see some of you friends here already know Sinohydro very well, but some may not. Therefore, before I move further, I think it's necessary to give a brief introduction to my company. Established in 1950s, Sinohydro is the pioneer of China's hydropower development. It carries down its merits to this 21st century and has developed it into a leading player both at home and abroad in a scope of business covering engineering, construction, manufacturing, and investment in connection with infrastructures of hydraulic and other types of renewable energy, transport, civil and industry buildings, and so forth. Sinohydro is proud of its have 130,000 staff working for its 9 holding companies and 18 subsidiaries. Currently, Sinohydro has over 220 projects and implementation in 60 countries, with a total contract value around $20 billion. Sinohydro is witnessed China's economic engagement as well as its development in Africa in the past more than half a century. We participate in various other programs supported by the government in the 1950s and expanded our business into Africa in the end of the 1990s. By this time, we have about 120 ongoing projects throughout Africa, most of which are infrastructure works. Looking back on our business engagement in Africa, we tend to ascribe our success or failure to the following elements, which explain themselves the chance for our cooperation with the American business in Africa. The first, lower position in the supply chain of infrastructure procurement, which is evident from the number of construction projects we are engaged in. Secondly, practical and suitable skill and technologies for the development projects in Africa, which we think it's because of similar development paths of Africa compared to the way China is developing. This gives us advantage of relative easy acceptance by African government and African people. And competitiveness in price without low quality of projects, reliable commitment to deliver good quality works, support from Chinese government in terms of policy and effort to harmonize the relationship between China and African countries, which contributes quite big to the regional stability and development. As a result, such policy and effort also create a favorable social and political environment for smooth project implementation. Traditional friendship with the African people, which is a passport to mutually understanding and trust and a shortcut to report. In comparison, American firms like GE, AES, Stanley have obviously advantages in the upstream of the supply chain with strength of management, manufacturer, consultants. Such difference in development and positions in the industry structure make American and Chinese companies supplementary to one each other in many business occasions, and Africa in particular for the reasons mentioned above. Therefore, cooperation and alliance between them would form a pole of synergy to mutually benefit. That is why Sinohydro entered into a strategic partnership with GE, participate with GE AES in Ghana on a gas-fired power plant, keep high-level exchange of visit with American companies like Stanley to identify and explore the possibilities of cooperation. The above point at the business level can extend, we believe, to a much larger scope at various levels. Firstly, because of increasing interdependence among countries as a result of globalization. Secondly, because of commonly faced issues like energy security, which entails bilateral talks in quest for safe and interest-based solutions. And thirdly, because of shared commitment to eliminating poverty and bringing economic development and social stability to Africa in a humanitarian and environmentally friendly manner. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, you've heard three different views, one from private sector, one from the research organ, which, by the way, should have identified as the Institute of West Asia and Africa at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. It's the highest academic research organization in China on social sciences. The other, Mr. Sheng, is with a parastatal company, so you're seeing a range of opinions. I should say that there were two others to be on the delegation from the private sector, but Homeland Security arranged to have their interviews after the program, so they were not able to get out of the country. But in any case, this is not an unfamiliar problem. We're dealing in Africa as well, or around the world. I promised first, and also I want to say to back in the back, I promised you earlier, but I want to say before anyone starts, the speeches have been made up here, so keep the questions, or else I'll just cut you off. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. My name is Ni Akwete. I'm with an organization here called ADNA. I am from Ghana, and I was particularly glad to hear Professor Hay, what she said about questions in Africa, whether cooperation between the United States and China, whether that is the best strategy. So in fact, my question is very simple. I would like the panelists to make the case for me and for the rest of Africans why cooperation is better, because we believe competition is better. Thank you.
My name is Femi Akibi, and I am with ADC, and I'm originally from Nigeria. My simple observation is that we're talking about China relationship with Africa, a continent the size of 1 billion people in it. But we are not here to discuss us, why are we not on the table to discuss our issue? Where do we become your subject to be discussed when the cake, the owner of the cake is still on the table? That's my question.
Thank you. I'm Leon Weintraub, University of Wisconsin, Washington Semester in International Affairs. I noticed in some of the slides that some of the financing was done by the Exim Bank of China. Now, I noticed that among the Exim banks of the OECD countries, there are mutually agreed standards of how these Exim banks should be operating to make sure everything is above board and all the financing is transparent. I'm wondering if the Exim Bank of China adheres to some of these standards as well.
Question, Sharon, and then we'll do some answers and then more questions.
Hi, my name is Sharon Freeman, and Dr. He was saying that a lot of people talk the talk. Well, I'm walking the walk. After our book, China, Africa, and the African Diaspora, which you're featured in, I did create a company called China, Africa, Americans, Chinese, and Africans Connecting. So as we're talking about trilateral cooperation and the private sector, I'm interested in promoting business-to-business linkages. So I'd like your advice on how to promote the trilateral relationship, but not at the government level, between firms, and which are the institutions in China and in Africa that can help, facilitate those kinds of business-to-business partnerships.
Okay. Who would like to take the first crack at some of this?
Always the leader.
I think mental health means the senior citizen in the table. But anyway, I feel say thank you to a gentleman from Ghana talking about should we have competition rather than cooperation. I feel both is there, because if you have cooperation, we also have competition to do the best. And always, I think, in anywhere, if you don't have cooperation, you don't have competition. It goes hand in hand in parallel. For example, like in Ghana, I personally helped a friend called Mr. Toby, the 14th, to form an association and to establish the World Trade Center in Accra. So he has to compete with 3 other tenders to get the approval for the license from the World Trade Center Association based in New York. In order to get the approval, he has to compete against 3 other Ghanaians to get the approval, and he has to be the best of the lot. So I think what is happening is we try to get the best to provide to the service and provide to the ability of the person. So I would like to look forward to see, do we have more cooperation, but also better competition on a higher level playing field. Thank you.
Lady first. Okay. So I think I pick up I will respond the comments from our Nigerian friends first. Actually, I fully agree with your opinion, because the time limitation, I couldn't express my opinion in full length. So I fully agree with you. Africa couldn't be becoming a subject for others to talk or to design. Actually, Africa should be sitting in the driving seat. And I think when China, United States, or China, European countries are discussing what kind of cooperation, I think we badly need to hear the opinion, to know the wisdom, and also get participation from Africans country. That's for sure. Otherwise, none of those trilateral cooperation projects can survive. I'm sure about that. This is for sure, no question about that. And the second, another is from our Ghana, why cooperation is better for Africa. So if we want to prove it is positive, we have to first prove the competition is bad, right? So we have to approve the first one. That's wrong, that's a bad thing. And then we talk about we should move to the right thing. So right now, what kind of bad thing coming from competition? So far, I think maybe people talking about some projects are overlapped. maybe when you go to a water project, and then Chinese also go to water project, and then even the local government, they have their own developed the strategy. They will have their own plan for this water issue, and then even this kind of competition make the things in a worse way. So in that case, and then cooperation is better. So I think it fully depends on case by case and country by country. So I cannot give a clear answer saying, okay, let's move to cooperation. I also agree with you, maybe some case, some sector, maybe competition is a good thing. Actually, the competition itself is the essence of why the capitalist can develop so well. And the third question coming from Dr. Sarong, I think it's quite challenging for me. I dare not to become your advisor for the career you are doing. But for business to business, I think first of all, the database is very important. For example, sometimes I also facing some consultancy requests coming from Chinese companies. So I think first and foremost, I should offer them some data. What's going on in some countries they are intended to go. So the information data is the first thing. And then I think some mechanism also is very important. You know who and who in some certain country, and then you know who and who in your own country, and then you can bring them together. So, and another thing, those North Africa and now to the Middle East, all those unrest now reminds us, not only as scholars and also our entrepreneurs for sure, now the country risk, political risk, now should be taken into consideration. Before, we haven't thought too much about that. People only focus on economic risk. Say maybe the exchange rate now is so fluctuation. And now suddenly you find that like Tunisia, this country has been long regarded as a very competitive and a very stable country. And then suddenly things happen just overnight. So all of this, I think, should be taken into consideration within a kind of mechanism. So this platform should draw in like scholar, business person together, and then they can offer different perspective. I'm not a business person by myself. Okay.
I think just to supplement Madam He's comment up to the lady here. I used to be a vice chair of the All China Federation of Industry and Commerce. We have 6 million entrepreneurs, all privately owned. And underneath this umbrella, we have about 24 different committees dealing with different types of business. For example, if you're interested in apparel and garment, we have a committee to serve your needs. And if you're interested in selling, cosmetics, also maybe in real estate development, in jewelry. We also have another separate institution under All China Federation for China-African Business Development. And so if in case you're interested, you can always send us an email, but you let us know what your interests are. And I'm sure you can have more than a swarm of entrepreneurs try to do business with you in China, or vice versa.
Actually, Wang Minfu is a partner.
Who? Really? Okay, good. Wang Mengfu. He's the chairman, but you have to talk to the people who are doing the business. The chairman is too busy. And one other thing is about the Exim Bank, because aside from the Exim Bank for the big projects development in Africa and other worldwide cities areas, there's another bank called the China Development Bank, headed by Mr. Chen Yan. Is also under the agreement with the China African Business Council. They would also make loan arrangements to private entrepreneurs to do business in Africa, subject to due diligence and checking. So some of the entrepreneurs from China have been carrying out some resort development or maybe setting up factories in different places, and they apply to the China Development Bank for a loan. So this is for entrepreneurs, not for state-owned capital or state-owned companies. In fact, China now, or the country, is encouraging the self-made businessmen or the entrepreneurs, self-made businesswomen too, including myself. So to do business overseas and help them to have certain loan facilitations, so they don't need to remit all the money out or the capital from China. And for example, like the China Development Bank, I think they have about 40 branches worldwide now. Thank you.
Yes, regarding the China Exim Bank. So Sinohydro is got strong support from China Exim Bank and also China Development Bank. In Africa, Sinohydro's project around 30% is get support from China Exim Bank, because it's Africa countries need to development, need this financing. Some is project is there, but there's no money. So China Exim Bank is they have their special policy to fund solution to help Africa countries to solve the financing problem. So with Sinohydro is a state-owned company. So we together with China Exim Bank to do some business in Africa country. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sheng. I'm a senior political science student at Swarthmore College. My question is about the changing nature of China's engagement with Africa of this century. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but China's engagement with Africa is largely driven by the nation's need for natural resources in Africa. And with an expanding sector for renewable energy in China, how will the nature of Chinese engagement with Africa change? And what about the nature of the U.S.? And what are their implications for U.S.-China cooperation on the African continent? Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Quinn Libson with Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. And I have a fairly straightforward question, I think, and that's just how much you involve African countries and African people in your projects, mainly the large infrastructure projects. Whether they're built by Africans, overseen by African communities, and how much engagement and ownership there is of the project in those local communities, and whether you're working to build capacity in those places. So thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello. Is it on? Lawrence Freeman from Executive Intelligence Review African Desk. I think China's approach on infrastructure development is probably the most sane economic policy going on today, far saner than what's going on in the West. And in terms of this infrastructure approach, the first speaker, you identified correctly, food, water, health, and food and water especially. And I know that Sinohydro has been involved in many hydro projects, including now some big dams in Ethiopia. Have you looked at the question of not just country by country, but regional development for Africa? For example, you brought up Sudan, which has 80 million hectares of arable land. How have you thought about how to develop this land through water, electricity, transportation for all of Sudan, Somalia, going through a famine, North Africa, these kind of larger regional projects rather than just country by country? Have you given any thought to that?
Thank you. Steve Lanning, Manchester Trade. The RAP, use the expression, or the criticism or the concern of U.S. business towards vis-a-vis China in terms of Africa is what they always state as your unfair competitive advantage. You have an export-import program about 14 times the size of the U.S. a year, and of course it's linked simply to buying Chinese products and so on, even if you have American joint venture products. The accusation is if you put up 15% of money sometimes by state-run or parastatals or PLA types of companies, then China will supply 85%. Whereas the U.S. does try to work in its programs with an emphasis on good governance. China doesn't seem, again, the accusation is that China doesn't really pay attention to governance. They just simply give money for the projects. Concern that whereas there's been a lot of debt relief in terms of what the Western debts are, China is slowly but surely beginning to create debt, whether it's debt that's tied to foregone foreign exchange, I'm going to stop because I don't want to make a statement, but whether it's in terms of foregone foreign exchange or money you have to pay back and so on. And then the last question is the question about, regional. Since there's such an emphasis on regional development, a lot of regional corridor projects, does China do anything on a regional as opposed to a national basis? Thank you.
Well, I think I'd like to say thank you to all the gentlemen and ladies asking the questions. Talking about, is China having a change in the engagement in business in Africa? I think yes, because as I mentioned to you, the first time I know someone who has been doing business in Africa is my good friend's late father, Mr. Cha. He went to set up spinning and also the dyeing industry for garment in Lagos, Nigeria. He went there just empty-handed. He eventually developed a business that he also sent all the material to Manchester in UK to be made into clothing and sweaters. So he is really the first person I've seen to do globalization in industry and business. And then, of course, back in the late 60s, certain countries in Africa like to have building their railroads. If I have read in the history, Chinese government has sent out as aid to do the infrastructure and building. But then for the last 10 years or so, the government has been encouraging state-owned companies or maybe privately held companies to do business on their own. So frankly speaking, nowadays, the companies that I've known who are doing business in Africa have been trying to go to compete or do any engaging in projects on their own capacity. The government is not leading them by the hand, or the government is not sponsoring any projects they do. But once they are able to get the project, they may try to ask for some help in the financing and the loan. I think this is fair practice to any other companies that carry on business from Australia. Australian companies are also doing business in Africa. Japanese companies are also doing in Africa. It's not just Chinese companies are doing in a different, unique way. But I think also maybe from the U.S. angle, if the U.S. companies feel they don't have the same, they don't enjoy the same service, maybe it's time for the U.S. government to consider they should provide better facilities to assist the U.S. companies to do business. It's none of the business of the Chinese companies or the Chinese government to tell the U.S. company what to do. So I think in a way, it's very important is the attitude and the understanding of the public sector to support the private business when they engage in overseas international business. I've noticed in my own observation that the Japanese companies, when they go to do business in Africa, the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs in Japan will take the Japanese companies out as a group, and then we'll introduce all these big names. I think a lot of friends here will know. Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Ito, Marubeni, and all these companies will send the staff not from Japan. They send all the staff who can engage in Western practice, all from London, to come and meet and greet other people. So actually, the most nation-led or the government-led companies are Japanese companies nowadays, not Chinese companies. And the next thing is when you talk about does the Chinese companies engage or employ African nationals to do business in their own? Very much so. If you notice, for the last 30 or 40 years, how many African students have come to study in different universities in China at the expense and scholarship of the Chinese Ministry of Education. You'll be surprised. And a lot of these students, after learning Chinese, they are actually becoming businessmen or their own entrepreneurs to do business between Africa and China. And some of them, they spend half a year in China, half a year in their own territory. In fact, even the China African Business Council, we have engaged a gentleman called Sama, who actually is from Cameroon, can speak French, English, Chinese. He even have a Chinese wife. So he is doing so much business that we are very surprised that he is really a very talented entrepreneur. And we also have people who are from other countries who are now settling down in Shanghai and then help the Chinese companies to do business in Africa. So I think it depends on the entrepreneurial spirit of the person. And also a lot of the companies from China now who are establishing the medicine company and factories in Uganda and other places are engaging a lot of the African students who have studied in China to be helping them to run the business there, because they, first of all, they can speak Chinese. Secondly, they can speak the local dialect like Swahili or Twi or other languages in Africa. So there's no, I would say, there's no special arrangement is only engaging Chinese nationals. But also the African nationals, when they try to do business, they have to understand they're working with a Chinese company, so they have to learn the Chinese culture. The same like when we work for an American company, we have to respect the American cultures too. And then one other thing about the debt financing, and also the gentleman referred about what we, how we get the engagement in financing. It is actually is a case by case, because when I remember we went to do business in Beijing back in 1978, 79, we don't even have an RMB. I can only use a foreign exchange certificate. Then nowadays we have the RMB. We are able to use the RMB to be recognized to do a fair exchange on international market. Times have changed, and a lot of the business in China for the last 30 years have progressed more than like about a century in my own observation and my own participation in the economic progress in China. And also I think when we are talking about how we can help certain African business to be done with the debt financing, and also with the, because the evaluation of RMB is going more and more, it depends on the type of projects, and also the length of the project itself. And also I feel when we are doing business in Africa, we have to look at the political stability of that particular region, not the country, but the region. And it's very important in terms of the engagement. So I think the debt financing has to be done with very detailed evaluation, not only by the company, but by, I would say, the strategists. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to address two questions has been raised, and then left another two to Mr. Sheng. So the first one, in terms of the changing nature of China-African relations, that's for sure. The nature of China-African relations is changing. Why is that? Because China is changing. Very simple. Because you can see, if I just have a brief recall about China-Africa relations. So in the first, from the 1950 all the way to the end of 1970s, so the China-African relations mainly focus on political issue, so ideological driven. And then from 1980 all the way to the year 2000, and the focus has been mainly on the economic cooperation. And now from the 2000 up to now, since the China-African Cooperation Forum has been established, and then we can see the multiple elements has been injected in these relations. Now you can see the recent wrapped up China-African Cooperation Forum. Now the clean energy, that's the renewable energy issue, has been put on the high concern, priority concern. So 100 clean energy projects has been pledged by the Chinese government to set up in the African continent. And then you can see also the NGO contact. Because China itself is changing. Now you can see a lot of NGO in China. The number of Chinese NGO has been increased dramatically. And now we focus on this people-to-people contact. Also back to the 2009, the FOCAC meeting. And then the new 8 measures has been issued by the government. The number 8 is trying to strengthen the academic exchange between Chinese, Africanese, and African colleagues. So there are lots of change has been taken on. And another comment talking about unfair competition between Chinese companies and the United States companies. I think you only focus on this Chinese government, the bank, Export-Import Bank, or China-African Fund. But if you look at the picture in a broader way, you will see a lot of unfair competition, even for Chinese companies. I can easily pick up like a language issue, like a law system issue, like also because the Chinese companies, they are complaining about why we just earn so low the margin profit. And then you can see the 3 shifts a day, the working hour is extremely long. So those things, when they see the American colleagues, they stay in the 5-star hotel, and then they work in the extremely harsh condition there. So that's unfair, another kind of unfair. And also, even though we have the Export-Import Bank support, but you have Bill Gates Foundation here, right here. So lots of rich millionaire, billionaire, they're all willing to invest in your business. But we also have some rich groups, but they are, at the moment, just consuming luxury goods. So made another contribution to your economy. So that's another unfair. So many unfair things goes on. I can name more unfair for Chinese companies, so very few for American companies. 有对你的问题，就是那个地区主义。
不然我回答那个要的。Hello, yes, regarding the local people involved the project, Sinohydro in Africa's project. So local people is involved in the project, and some laborers, operators are very popular. Is all the laborers resource from the local, Sinohydro only send some engineers and management staff for the project operation. Yeah.
Actually, we are at 5 o'clock. That's the time of agreement. We have another part of the program. I will want to say a number of things I'd like to point out. That the Chinese government, just as the Japanese government and others, have taken some very high-level people to help lead the business delegations. The last time the U.S. Secretary of Commerce visited Africa was 2002. I don't know when an American president has taken a business delegation to Africa. So I think that there's also got to be some serious policy revisions within the United States. The EXIM Bank, again, yes, it has to follow OECD rules, but it is particularly risk-averse when it comes to Africa as opposed to all other continents. EXIM, it's hard to fault the EXIM Bank of China in many ways for helping. Sure, it helps parastatal companies. There's also a lot of smaller private companies that they're helping, working with as well. We should be so lucky that the EXIM Bank would do the same here. We really need to look at how we're going to address the situation and come up with new approaches. With that, I would like to thank all the questioners for keeping their questions brief. And we will thank all of you for coming out, and certainly thanking the panelists, and above all, thanking CSIS and Jennifer Cooke for her support. Thank you very much. You would have been, if we had time, you would have been next.